With dawn fast approaching, this quiet corner of rural England is transformed into a sea of activity as over 500 cyclists descend upon the quiet seaside town of Minster-on-Sea for the start of this momentous journey across southern England. We're setting off on a journey that will see us cross 5 counties of the UK's diverse landscape, taking in coastal industry, natural wetlands, Roman roads, villages, vales, rivers and gorges along the way. Sunrise is upon us as we leave the vast expanse of the Kent shoreline behind and head south through the town. The steady stream of cyclists cutting a symbol of friendship and camaraderie on its path around the quiet residential streets and out onto the A2 500. It's mile 4 now as we pass beneath the impressive structure of the Isle of Sheppey crossing. Constructed in 2006 to replace the much older vertical lift Kingsferry crossing, which the route takes us on here, it stands at over 115 feet above the Swale, making it the first fixed link to mainland Kent. Heading east now, we make our way along Old Ferry Road and into Raspberry Hill Lane as the ride continues through the tranquil lowlands of North Kent. Here the comparatively flat terrain and quiet country roads as we follow the banks of the River Medway should provide very little in the way of physical challenges along this 7-mile stretch. So now is probably a good opportunity in which to find a rhythm that suits your own particular riding style as we complete the first 6 miles of the ride. We're now on the A2 on what was, and still is, an important transport route linking London with Canterbury and the channel ports of southeast England. There are a few lumps in the profile here to test the legs, particularly as we head through the historic naval towns of Rainham, Chatham and Rochester, as the route snakes its way around the River Medway. Chatham Hill draws upon us, which should be approached with an element of caution for those keen to get some quick early miles in, so take care on the approach just before the railway bridge and be ready to stop if necessary at the traffic signals. just before Rochester Bridge. It's worth pointing out here one of the area's more popular tourist attractions. Standing on the east bank of the River Medway and tucked away from view, the impressive 12th century Rochester Castle served as a strategically important fortification during the late medieval period, protecting England's southeast coast from invasion, where it bore witness to military action several times throughout a 166-year period, until towards the end of the 14th century, when its custodianship was relinquished by the Crown. Today, with its 113-foot high keep and walls 12 feet thick in places, the castle remains one of the best preserved examples of Norman architecture, with its ruins under the care of English Heritage, and is open daily from April to October. Over the River Medway now, and we're on our way out of Rochester. There's just a few more turns until we leave the last major town until Orpington at mile 38. We're now at mile 20 as the undulations in the profile continue and the quieter country roads make a welcome return to the ride. A gentle descent of Sundridge Hill awaits before we take a sharp right turn into Bush Road at the bottom. Here is perhaps a good opportunity to regroup before we head towards the more genteel surroundings of rural Kent. This 1 mile long stretch of Cobham Bury Road offers a short early test just before we reach the picturesque village of Cobham at mile 23. At nearly 9% maximum gradient, it proves to be a good stretch of the legs, as the route profile begins to offer a bit more to the ride. Cobham village itself claims strong links with Sir Charles Dickens, who was frequently seen visiting the village, as the famous novelist drew inspiration from the surroundings whilst writing his first novel, The Pickwick Papers. The route continues through the more leafier suburbs of northwest Kent, with these minor roads perhaps a bit more neglected in some areas than their busier counterparts. So watch out for changes in conditions here, particularly among the several tree-lined sections towards the village of Longfield and beyond. Through the residential streets of South Derenthe at mile 30, and there's a sense now that the London suburbs are not far from us as we begin to tick off several provincial towns on our way to our first major feed stop at Crystal Palace. Here there's a mix of rural back streets and quieter country roads amidst the urban sprawl, as the route completes its journey through Kent and into Surrey. Through the picturesque village of Swanley Village at mile 34, the route makes a course via the parishes of Hockenden, St Paul's Cray and Chislehurst, and the profile causes little trouble, although expect a few changes during the course of the ride here, as residential roads give rise to single-track lanes connecting each village. The early stages of the ride are all about getting the right tempo, so it's perhaps a good opportunity to join a group that is similar to your own pace, and not be tempted to put in any hard efforts now, keeping plenty in the tank for the hard yards later on in the day. Breaking into small groups is also important and will pay dividends further into the ride, particularly as we head into the more congested areas of the London suburbs. More transitional phases here to pick our way through, as the tree-lined sections bring with it a little shelter from the elements on the approach to St Mary Cray at mile 38. Whilst the profile shouldn't cause too much alarm during these stages, the lengthier grinds certainly give your legs something to think about, most notably this 800-foot-long 3% drag of Leeson's Hill at mile 38, and the slightly longer half-mile-long 4% climb of the Chislehurst Road at mile 41, coming in quick succession of one another. Miles further down the road at mile 43, and the bustling town of Bromley offers another pause in the proceedings if time is on your side. Here there's a generous selection of prominent cafes and grocery stores to stock up on as we continue heading further into the more crowded sections. As we cross the border into Surrey at mile 46, the Saturday morning traffic will have undoubtedly begun to intensify, leading to some congestion as we ride through the towns of Beckenham and Penge at miles 45 and 46 respectively. So take extra care on these busier sections. In the distance, you might catch a glimpse of Crystal Palace Transmitting Tower. Constructed in the mid-1950s, originally to serve a 60-mile radius, it stands at 719 feet on top of Crystal Palace Park and was the tallest structure in London for some 40 years, until One Canada Square in Canary Wharf was completed in 1991. The name Crystal Palace was conceived following the relocation of the structure, which housed the Great Exhibition of 1851, where more than 14,000 exhibitors from around the world gathered within its 990,000 square foot exhibition space to display examples of technology developed during the Industrial Revolution. Originally constructed in Hyde Park, it stood at the top of Sydenham Hill from 1854 until its destruction by fire in 1936. At 367 feet above sea level, it is also one of the highest points in London and offers breathtaking views across the city. Approaching the end of Thicket Road and the junction with the A214, the route here takes us on to Annerley Hill, with an average gradient of 6.4% and a maximum of 11.4. This 3/4 of a mile stretch represents the final test before our first major feed stop of the day, Cadence Performance Cycling Centre at mile 48. Once at the top, the centre can be found on your left-hand side, and will provide a welcome break from what should hopefully have been an enjoyable introduction to the ride, and where riders can indulge in a hot breakfast and a chance to regroup. The next stage begins in earnest as we wave goodbye to Cadence Cycle Centre and head west through Crystal Palace Town Centre and take a dive through the back streets of South London, not before tackling this short 5% run up the Crowndale Hill to the traffic signals and the junction with the A215. The wide expanse of Streatham Common brings up the 50-mile mark as we swing left and then right just after the main thoroughfare leading up to the High Street, cutting a route between Wandsworth and Wimbledon. There's more greenery to be observed at Tooting Bec Common, as the route takes a straight line along the A314 at mile 52. And we complete our roundup of London's suburban open spaces for now, with the arrival of Wandsworth Common at mile 53. Then it's a left onto the Magdalene Road, passing Wandsworth Cemetery on your right, then right onto Garrett Lane, and left onto Penwith Road. Then finally right onto Merton Road as we enter the district of Southfields. Just after we've left Southfields at mile 56, the route links up with a busy section of the route out of southwest London, and it's here where extra care needs to be taken. This is a fast-moving 1.5 mile stretch of the A3, and with the Saturday morning traffic heading towards Kingston upon Thames now in full swing, you'll need to be mindful of the steady flow of congestion around you, particularly as you need to position yourself in the far right-hand lane on the approach to the junction with the A308 just before Kingston Vale, so that you are ready for the arrival into Richmond Park. Richmond Park provides a welcome retreat from the hustle and bustle of suburban London traffic at mile 59, as we swap the sights and sounds of four wheels for two and head left into the park just after the Robin Hood gate entrance. And it's here where we join up with our London friends for the remainder of the ride. It's a pleasant jaunt through the park, and one which shouldn't pose any particular challenges in the terrain, save for this 3/4 of a mile long 4% spike along Broomfield Hill, just before the car park, disrupting the otherwise genteel proceedings. Created in the 17th century by Charles I, initially for the hunting of red and fallow deer, and covering an area of approximately 2,360 acres, Richmond Park is the largest of London's 8 royal parks, and one that has proved to be very popular with cyclists and runners alike over the years, owing in part to the 7-mile circuit around its perimeter, affectionately known as the Tamsin Trail. Not surprisingly, Saturday mornings here are very popular, so it's a good idea to keep to the left-hand side of the path in order to avoid the mass groups of club riders, enjoying their dash around the circuit. For those arriving in support vehicles who wish to meet up with the riders in Broomfield Hill car park along the route, the nearest vehicular entrances are Roehampton Gate, situated along the eastern boundary to the park, just off Clarence Lane, or Kingston Gate in the southwest corner. Departing through Kingston Gate, we leave Richmond Park behind and advance towards the lively town of Kingston upon Thames, on what will undoubtedly be a more congested section of the A308 at this stage of the proceedings, as we navigate the town's main thoroughfare and over the historic 190-year-old bridge spanning the River Thames. A short 1-mile burst along the A308, and we arrive outside the entrance to Hampton Court Palace on the left-hand side, bounded by its ancient high screen wall and railings. Rich in history, the palace was originally constructed in 1515 for Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who was a favourite among the court of King Henry VIII. However, as the cardinal fell from favour in 1529, owing to his failure to seek an annulment of the king's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry seized the palace for himself, with the monarch proclaiming it as his principal London residence. Along with St James's Palace, it is one of only 2 royal palaces to have survived from this period, and welcomes almost 1 million visitors through its doors each year. Continuing along the A308, we're now enjoying one of the flattest sections of the Chase the Sun route. This 9-mile stretch from Hampton Court Palace to Chertsey sees us follow the River Thames as it winds its way through the lower reaches of Surrey on its way to rural Berkshire. Just before we exit left onto the Lower Hampton Road, you cannot fail to notice the grandeur of the Hampton Waterworks at mile 65. These impressive Grade 2 listed structures, which dominate the western end of Hampton, came into existence as a result of the Metropolis Water Act of 1852, which prohibited the extraction of water from the tidal Thames and meant that the river water, pumped via a network of steam-powered engines, had to be taken above Teddington Lock. Under the M25 at mile 72 now, as the leafy lanes around Chobham Common provide for some much-needed shelter from the elements on what could be a very hot day in the saddle. The profile is somewhat kinder to us in these parts on the run into Windlesham, as the route weaves its way through this Surrey greenbelt along the Stonehill Road and right onto Gracious Pond Road at mile 75. Of the town of Bagshot at mile 82 coincides with the appearance of Spokes, one of several cycle shops dotted along the route, where James Thompson and his team of experts will be on hand to provide some bike maintenance free of charge, together with a generous 15% discount on any purchases from their shop. With free homemade cakes also in offering, it's surely an offer too tempting to miss. Leaving Bagshot behind, the profile for the next 10 miles offers what could only be described as moderately elevated as we approach the final 15 miles before the lunch stop at Bramley. More often than not, here it is the longer 3% type of inclines that cause most concern, as over 80 miles in the legs begins to show. The busy A30 between Bagshot and Camberley is a typical example of this, where a 1 mile section rises approximately 120 feet on the approach to the roundabout by the American Golf Outlet and offers an average gradient of 3.4% along its length. Equally, where there is effort, there is reward with this 1 mile, 2% slide into Camberley, our next stop at mile 85. And the last major town to be ticked off the list for some 65 miles, until we reach Devizes at mile 150. Camberley is home to the Royal Military Academy, more commonly known as Sandhurst, and is the British Army's initial officer training centre, bearing the names of several royal personnel among its alumni, more recently Princes William and Harry. The present academy was founded in 1947, and it is here where potential officers are identified by the Army Officer Selection Board, following a rigid and often challenging training process, both physically and mentally. Turning into Hampshire at mile 86, we leave the busy A30 and turn right onto the B327 towards Yateley and Eversley Cross, continuing our theme as we head towards Bramshill at mile 93. Mile 95 and at the end of the causeway just before we turn left onto the busy A33, the Duke of Wellington commemorative column stands opposite us as a potent symbol of 19th century architecture. The monument, erected in 1863 to commemorate the life of Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, whose residence Stratfield Say lies within the same grounds as the monument, is topped by a bronze statue designed by Baron Carlo Maraschetti, an Italian-born French sculptor, who was also commissioned to produce several pieces, including most notably the 4 bronze lions around the base of Nelson's Column in London's Trafalgar Square, and the seated figure of Prince Albert for the Albert Memorial in Kensington Gardens. Our brief encounter with the A33 ends as we turn off into the more bucolic surroundings of Stratfield Say at mile 98, passing just a stone's throw away from the 13th century house of the same name. Stratfield Say House is the country retreat of the Duke of Wellington and has remained the ancestral home of the Wellington family since 1817. The 100-mile mark arrives, and with it, the eagerly awaited lunch stop at the Bramley Inn in the quiet village of Bramley, where riders can reflect upon their efforts across Kent, Surrey and Hampshire, and enjoy a fine selection of hot and cold foods, served at this 19th century former coaching inn. With the course now firmly detached from city life, reinvigorated legs should welcome this gentle reintroduction to the ride. With a register of barely 150 feet in elevation over the next 4 miles, and with the numerous Hampshire villages, together with their quieter interconnections that lie in wait, offer the prospect for riders to work off their lunch before the harder miles ahead. across the busy A340, now at Pamber End at mile 103, strolling along the Pamber Road where it meets with Old Chapel Lane, before this squeeze down one of the lanes in Charter Alley, until the intersection with Monk Sherborne Road, just before turning right onto the Bowcurst Road at Ramsdell at mile 105. The route continues to snake its way through these parts, with the passing of Wolverton Townsend at mile 107. Sleepy hamlets of Kingsclere and Ekinswell follow the former of these two peaceful hamlets, boasting strong horse racing connections at miles 110 and 112 respectively. We're now deep in the heart of the Wiltshire countryside, in a little village called Burghclere, which serves as one of the gateways to the North Wessex Downs at mile 115, covering an area of just over 270,000 acres, and designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty. The Downs attract a large number of outdoor pursuits, most notably horse racing, where this equine activity forms a major industry in the area, largely owing to the good quality turf that complements the chalk underlay, with much of the upland area made over to gallops and other training areas. Several of the upland villages, and in particular the large village of Lambourne, approximately 15 miles north, are home to major racing stables. The term steeplechase was actually derived in this area, with it originally being a race between two villages, navigated by reference to the church steeples, which are visible across the rolling downs. It's perhaps not surprising then that the area comprises no less than 9 white horses, set into the chalk hillsides, posing as stunning representations of this particular breed of animal. Crossing over the busy A34 at mile 116 and down along Fox's Lane, this tree-covered section pushes us further west, deeper into the more far-flung reaches of the North Wessex Downs, intersecting with the busier A343 at the bottom. Then it's straight across onto Walton Hill Road, taking you into Walton Hill at mile 118. A left turn at the village hall onto Church Street takes you out of Walton Hill, and with it the last significant evidence of community life for several miles. Perhaps the only shortcoming of adopting a route through these beautiful parts of southern England is that you may find the occasional public house functioning as one of the few locations in which to replenish any potentially depleting stocks to fill the gaps over the next 10 miles or so, whilst the sporadic hint of habitation reminds us of just how remote this region can be along this flowing roller coaster section just north of Walbury Hill, with the villages of East Woodhay immediately before mile 120, Upper Green at mile 123, and Ham at mile 126, filling in the gaps in between. Approaching mile 127 and tracing a route into Shelbourne, we come across this delightful country pub, The Plough. With its offering of light refreshments and bar snacks, it might just be the extra boost one needs to tackle the 1/4 mile long, 8.5% average ramp of Carver's Hill, just as we depart the village. Set high above the village of Wilton towards the eastern end of the Pewsey Vale, at mile 129, lies the impressive Wilton Windmill. Built in 1821 to produce flour for the local area, following the canalisation of the River Bedwin during the construction of the Kennet and Avon Canal. The windmill remained in use until the early part of the 20th century, by which time competition from much larger, steam roller mills meant that this once important structure began to fall into disrepair. This led to a campaign to return it to its former glory, and in 1971 it was saved from obscurity by Wiltshire County Council, where it now enjoys Grade 2 listed status and the honour of being the only working windmill in Wessex. Its canvas sails still turn to this day, producing wholemeal stone ground flour, and is open to the public from April until the end of September. We're now passing through the beautiful and picturesque village of Wilton at mile 130, passing the Swan Public House and Duck Pond on the left, gazing in admiration at the beautifully crafted thatched cottages along the way. Then it's right onto the A338 at East Grafton. There's a brief opportunity to grab a bite at the conveniently located petrol station at the Burbage roundabout at mile 133. Then it's off along the B3087 towards Easton Royal. Into Pewsey at mile 138, and the one thing that strikes you about this place on the outskirts of the Pewsey Downs as soon as you enter it is its historical connections with the early British monarchy, with a statue of King Alfred the Great, the former Anglo-Saxon King of Wessex and local landowner, figuring prominently in the centre of the village. A few yards on and we're outside Marshall's Bakery, another of our ride friends who over recent years has very kindly donated leftover treats for riders to enjoy at the Royal Oak Public House nearby. And if the ride has taken its toll on your treasured set of wheels, then a visit to Pewsey Velocycles could be just the thing, who are on hand to offer their services. Leaving Pewsey, we're at the start of the majestic Pewsey Downs at mile 138. Belonging to the much larger North Wessex Downs, and on the edge of the Marlborough Downs, in an area of special scientific interest, the region delivers large expanses of grassland across some 750 acres, and showcases some of the world's rarest butterflies within its nature reserve. Expect plenty of undulations across this 10-mile stretch, with this punchier ascent of Alton Hill, just past the village of Wilcott at mile 141, serving as a typical example, with a rewarding half-mile 8% average descent the other side, just before Alton Barnes. "6 miles until we reach Devizes, an impressive man-made structure features prominently across Milk Hill to our right. Cut into the hillside, the Alton Barnes White Horse, as it is known, is a chalk hill figure of a white horse located just a few miles north of the village of Alton, measuring 180 feet high and 160 feet long. The figure was cut in 1812 under the commission of local farmer Robert Pyle, and is the second largest of the 9 white horses of this kind in Wiltshire. One of the country's best loved and most iconic white horses, it remains a popular tourist attraction and has regularly served as a landmark to signal the coming of the winter solstice, with candles being illuminated around its perimeter each year. There's just a small climb out of Allington at mile 144 to negotiate, then it's on to Horton at mile 145, and the run into Devizes. And before you know it, this historical market town emerges from the splendour of the Pewsey Downs at mile 150. Probably best known for its production of textiles during the 16th century, including wool and cloth, Devizes also boasted the largest corn market in the west of England during the 18th century. From the end of this period, however, the manufacture of textiles declined. Nonetheless, the world-famous Wadworth Brewery still remains in the town, having been founded here in 1875. Bikes and Boards Cycle Shop, which is open until 5 p.m, is also situated within the town, should a visit be required to help resolve any mechanical issues. As we leave Devizes via the bridge by the Black Horse Inn and continue heading west along the A361, you may catch sight of the network of gates that make up the Con Hill Locks at mile 151. This series of 29 flights of locks lie along a 2-mile section of the Kennet and Avon Canal between Rode and Devizes, and were the brainchild of engineer John Rennie, with each section rising 237 feet in as little as 2 miles to overcome the tricky incline. Owing to the steepness of the terrain, the sections between each lock where vessels lie, as they make their way along the canal, are very short. As a result, 15 of these locks require pounds, which extended sideways in which to store the water needed to operate them. With the rising popularity of the railway network at the beginning of the 20th century, as a more convenient means of transportation, the canal fell into disuse, with the last cargo arriving through the flights in October 1948. However, the mid-1960s witnessed a major rebuilding campaign, culminating in a visit by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in 1990 to officially reopen the locks and breathe new life into this historical landmark. With the prospect of the Mendip Hills to come, there's no hiding the fact that the profile here on in becomes increasingly challenging for many, particularly towards the latter stages of this final chapter of the ride. So it's perhaps a little comforting to learn that there is a comparatively flat 6-mile section up to Keyville to greet us first. This in spite of the potential southwesterly headwinds confronting us for much of this segment. Onwards now to the more remote parts of southwest Wiltshire, as we approach Paulshot at mile 152, continuing along this flat stretch to Keyville as the Wiltshire lowlands continue to offer little in the way of discomfort in the profile, not before hitting the village of Bulkington, sandwiched in between the two, and the very accommodating Well Inn public house situated at its heart. The quiet transitional sections from Bulkington, the busy stretch of the A350 just south of Trowbridge greets us just after mile 158. This 2-mile run down to Yarnbrook at mile 161 is a popular transport route for articulated vehicles, so it's advisable to approach this single file. Thankfully, the experience is reasonably short-lived, and the right-hand turn onto the Westbury Road at the roundabout by the Longs Arms Public House leaves much of the heavier traffic behind. You probably won't notice the change immediately, but mile 164, just after the village of Southwick, could be considered at the start of the Mendip Hills, as the rolling Wiltshire scenery is replaced by the more rugged Somerset landscape along the A361, where it intersects with the aptly named Village of Road at mile 165. Preceded by a third of a mile 5% average ramp up of the B3109 into the village before the route stumbles upon another watering hole at the charming and characterful Red Lion pub just up from Road Hill in Wolverton at mile 166. Road conditions take a considerable turn for the worst over the next few miles, particularly as the route guides us on a journey along the gravel-lined tracks between miles 167 and 171, so expect to encounter some breaking up of the often neglected road surface here, and take extra care on the short, winding descents pepper-potted along Hammer Lane and Chickwell Lane in amongst the brief, punchy inclines. After an undulating section across from Wolverton, mile 171 arrives, and with it the village of Hemmington. This peaceful hamlet, set in the heart of the North Somerset countryside, lies approximately 15 miles east of Cheddar Gorge, but don't let the tranquil surroundings fool you, since this place will always be remembered on the ride for just one thing: Southfield Hill. Shrouded on both sides of its sharp incline by a series of high hedges, via a narrow lane, this lung-busting brute of an ascent will have participants searching for extra gears as the ride reaches 500 feet above sea level and a crest in the Somerset Hills. After passing the Blessed Virgin Mary Church, on the left-hand side, there's approximately 900 feet to go before a sharp, right-hand bend rapidly transforms the rural, tree-lined passage into a frenetic search for any remaining strength left in the tank, and the climb registers a near 1 in 4 profile. The ascent lasts for approximately 500 feet before it gradually eases, bringing with it a sigh of relief, and the satisfaction that the steepest climb on the route has been ticked off. After the efforts of Southfield Hill, riders are rewarded with a pacey 6% descent of the B3139 as the ride takes us into Kilmersdon at mile 175. The roots of the classic fable Jack and Jill can be traced back to this pretty little Somerset village, where, towards the end of the 17th century, it is said that the young love-smitten couple climbed the hill at the end of Ames Lane, overlooking the village every day to fetch water from the nearby well. whereupon Jack was fatally wounded by a stray rock from Badstone Quarry and stumbled down the hill. Legend has it that at the time Jill was expecting a child, but sadly died shortly after giving birth. A plaque on the wall of the local primary school bears the inscription of the famous nursery rhyme, and serves as a constant reminder of the area's strong links with the story. Just as Kilmersdon slips to the back of our minds, the Mendip Hills never cease to remind us of the tests that still lie ahead, as the village leaves us with another memento of its undulating profile, Kilmersdon Hill. This 8.5% average incline may feel somewhat harder than the profile suggests, as tired legs carrying the weight of 175 miles within them scream upon every turn of the pedals, with the only crumb of comfort coming from the fact that the summit of the climb is in sight as soon as the ascent begins. A quick stop at the cooperative supermarket in Chilcompton at mile 178 is surely one for the agenda, since it's the final location to stock up on any meaningful provisions to fuel you on the remaining 28 miles to Burnham-on-Sea. A run through the village of Emborough at mile 180 awaits before the hop across to mile 181 presents a little light relief for the weary rider, averaging 2% along this 1.6 mile descent to the Bathway Crossroads. Conversely, this 3-mile section through miles 182 to 185 along the B3135 brings with it a considerable drag as we crest another high point in the Mendip Hills. The road begins to dip a little at mile 189, and we begin to see rock formations set into the sides of Cliff Road. These compositions gradually increase in size as the route continues, and it soon becomes apparent what lies ahead. Cheddar Gorge, set deep in the Mendip Hills, near the village of Cheddar, is a natural phenomenon, created over the course of 1.2 million years, thanks to a series of periglacial periods. There's no denying the breathtaking qualities of this exhilarating descent as riders navigate its 19 turns, culminating in the arrival into Cheddar Village, some 732 feet lower down. Britain's oldest complete human skeleton, affectionately known as Cheddar Man, and estimated to be over 9,000 years old, was discovered in one of the many cave systems here in 1903. Attracting some 500,000 visitors a year, the caves, produced by the activity of an underground river, are part of a wider site of special scientific interest, referred to as Cheddar Complex. Whilst ownership of the site is split, the northern side of the gorge being owned by the National Trust, whilst the southern side is retained by the Marquess of Bath's Longleat estate. Whilst the descent of Cheddar Gorge should be an enjoyable experience, it's important not to lose any concentration on the descent, taking particular care towards its lower reaches, as one or two of the slopes reach 16% and the switchbacks become increasingly narrower between the cliff faces. At the root of the descent, and if there's time, Ice Dreams tempts riders with ice creams and donuts from their menu, and a much-needed energy boost for the final 15 miles of the ride. As a special treat for Chase the Sun participants, the shop regularly opens until late as an added incentive for the weary traveller. Out of Cheddar Village now and onto the B3151. The elevation brings us right down to a little more than 10 feet above sea level, acting almost as a catalyst for this 1,500-foot-long, 10% average kick-up of Longhill through Clewer Village at mile 194, as we exit right off the Cheddar Road. Through the undisturbed villages of Staunton Cross at mile 195 and West Staunton at mile 196 now, the very models of remote suburban living. We are now 10 miles from the finish, and any insignificant lumps in the profile here will undoubtedly weigh down on the heavy legs of the 196 miles within them as the Staunton Road gives way to Blackford, one of our final brushes with pastoral England at mile 197. Passing across the Somerset lowlands via the B3139, and with the climbing finally behind us. Our only remaining encounter with parish life occurs at the village of Mark at mile 200, which lays claim to being the longest village in England at just under 2 miles in length. Out of the village of Mark, where we are now less than 5 miles until we reach the busy seaside town. Off the B3139 now, and right onto Pilmore Lane heading northwest, cutting almost a straight line towards Burnham-on-Sea. across the bridge over the M5 motorway, then it's a right-hand turn onto the A38, and then left at the roundabout onto the B3140 at mile 203, and the intersection with Edithmead, an enclave of the coastal town. Straight over the roundabout by the Tesco Superstore, left onto Oxford Street, then right onto College Street, before finally taking a left-hand turn onto the Esplanade at the end. Mile 206, and the end of the jetty along the Esplanade opposite the Reed Solms Public House, provides the setting for the conclusion to this momentous ride. We've seen us generate over 64,000 pedal turns, burned over 6,000 calories, climbed over 9,000 feet, and cycled 206 miles across 5 counties of England to reach our goal. And what a journey it has been.